I want my viewers to pay attention and see if you see a pattern in what I'm about to talk to you about, and hopefully it won't be that long of a video. So, here we go. Imagine this. Two parents come into a hospital as the mother's expecting to give birth. They give birth to a beautiful, young girl or boy, whatever, such and such amount of pounds, blah, 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 blah. Now, can they take that baby out of the hospital, legally, and just up and leave, blah, 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 no, not filing any paperwork or nothing like that? The hospital makes damn sure that before they leave, they file what is called a birth certificate, claiming what the baby's name is, who the father is, who the mother is, the pounds, the weight and the height and whatever the baby was born, blah, 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 and making a full record of it. Well, that birth certificate, at the top of the birth certificate, I believe mine says State of Nebraska. It will have a state name on it, or a government name on it, of any kind, and this is true worldwide. I'm not talking about just the United States, because each system's a different version of pretty much the same kind of system, really, just different ways about going about how to do it. But the government sets up a way to make people their slaves, technically. We have a government that is for the people, and blah, 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 and here in the U.S., supposedly, but in truth, our government is in debt, and we are what they've auctioned off as a liability to other countries for. So we are in servitude to our government, essentially. That's why they say the three things are: you're born, you pay taxes, and you die, because that's literally the three things you can count on. Anyway, going from this point forward, that little baby girl or baby boy, once they file that birth certificate, the family files that birth certificate to leave there, becomes a slave. The reason why is because each one, that father and that mother that filed that birth certificate, their father and mother filed a birth certificate on them, and so forth back in the day. The slaves gave birth to more slaves for the government, so on and so forth. Now follow the pattern and I'll show you what I mean. Now, that slave gets grown up in a nice childhood, whatever, 14 years old or whenever the hell that thing is, to register. If it's a guy, they have to register for selective service to join the military by force. The government can make you go into the military and, say that if you don't, you're going to prison. If you don't file, and that they did in World War I and II to protect this country, they can force you to go into the military or go to prison. That's your choices. Why they can do that? Because you're a slave from the get-go. Anyway, you have to file selective service to tell them that, you're of age to go in the military if needed. Women should, if they're allowed to go into military by choice, they should actually have to do selective service too, I would think, but that's a different subject altogether. Anyway, you also file for what's called a Social Security card at that age. You've technically had that account since you were born, and when you had a birth certificate, they assigned you a number called a Social Security number. Now, most people think that's just for your retirement down the line. If you work so many years, you get money paid back. Well, that's mathematically incorrect. You'd have to live another 200. You'd have to retire at 65 and live to another 100 years to get the money you paid back into the system back out of the system. You'll never get the amount of money that you paid if you work 9 to 5 your entire life for 40 or 50 years or more. The government made way more money off of you than they'll ever pay you back. But anyway, going into the Social Security, that is your slave number, or your straw man number. Now follow along. There's been other videos made of this, but you'll see the pattern as I go. Now that slave pitches in with his parents. He gets a job, at a coffee shop outside of school, whatever, in high school. Gets his first car. It's paid on a lease, owned by the bank, and you pay the bank off. If you don't pay the bank in time, the bank can repossess your car and take it, right? Now let's say the slave has a pre-owned car like mine, the 2002 Mazda Protege, where his parents or him, everybody pitched in and paid for it, let's say $2,500, whatever, filed it in his name, blah, 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 he has a car title, blah, 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 he's the supposedly owner of that car, right? Now, let's say the slave understands traffic signals or whatever, gets pulled over, blah, 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 or does something really bad, reckless driving, and goes plowing drunk into somebody's living room, or hauls 2 pounds of marijuana across a state that it's illegal in, or any kind of drug, whatever, and they say they can confiscate your car. Now, how can they just take your car? Fair question, right? Look on your car title. At the very top of your car title, it's going to say state of whatever. State of South Dakota, state of Nebraska, state of wherever the hell you're from. Or it's going to say government of blah, blah, blah. At the very top of that thing. That's because that's a lease contract with you, the steward, or the slave steward over that property. You're in charge of that property, yes, but you're not technically the owner of it. The state of whatever you're at, or the government of whatever you're at, actually owns it. If you were the owner, your name would be at the top of that list. You could drive down the road with no tags, no insurance, no nothing, and there's nothing anybody could do to you or about you or anything. You could go flying into somebody's house, it wouldn't matter. You could back that car back out and leave. And nobody could do shit to you because, if you're not a slave, if you're not, if you actually are the true owner of that car. But since you're not a true owner of that car, you're a steward over that property as a slave to the government, they can put you in jail and take your car. Makes sense, right? Now, let's follow along. That's the car title. That goes the same thing for RVs, boats, motorhomes, whatever. Anything that's got a state of whatever car title, you are a steward over, but you are not technically the owner of it. It says registered owner, because you're registered, but you're not actually the true owner of it, or they could not take your property from you like that. Now let's move on to a property deed with a house. It's the same exact thing. You are a first homeowner, and you get like a loan from the government, blah, 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 and they help you out or whatever. You don't even have to have that. You just worked your ass off and made all the payments your life. 20 years later down the line, you own your house, right? You paid the bank off. There's no lease with the house. The bank can't repossess or foreclose on your house because you own it, right? Failure to pay property tax for 10 years to the IRS. Try it once. 10 years. And if you don't believe me, the IRS will come and take your house away from you. Why? Because, again, at the top of that property deed, it says state of whatever, government of whatever. You don't actually own that $100,000 house that you think you do own. You're a steward over it as a slave. Follow along the pattern, and you'll see what I mean. Now, the slave gets married. Say, let's go into you have a marriage underneath God and family and friends and everything in a ceremony in a church, right? And you walk out of there. Are you legally married? Yes, in front of God and family and your friends you are. But until you file a marriage certificate, you are not legally married or to be jointly taxed or whatever underneath the government as the slave, because they don't know that two slaves came together and got married. You are still counted as two single slave adults because you don't have a marriage certificate, just like your birth certificate. Are you following along here? There's a pattern. Okay. Now, down the line, these two married slaves, after they filed a marriage certificate, they don't get along. One's a drug addict or can't keep a job or something. The other one beats the kids or whatever. Neighbors see this. They call in the DSS. DSS comes and takes your kids away. Now, how can they take your kids away from you if you gave birth to them? It was the male's sperm. It was the female's eggs. And you all gave birth to them. Technically, they're your property, really, technically, speaking until 18, or the government says you're responsible for them. How can the state come in there with a court order or whatever and take your kids away from you? Again, because you too, the male and female, are slaves, and you filed a birth certificate for each and every kid you have, and saying that it is a slave, and now they can come and take your kids away. Because they are slaves. Following along now, we get married. The marriage ain't going so very good, and you want to get, you split up, you've been gone, separated, whatever, for a few years, and you want to get remarried to somebody else. But you can't legally do so without getting a divorce certificate. So, are you following a pattern here? There's paperwork for every single thing here. That is exactly the same kind of pattern as property ownership, property stewardship. You filed a divorce certificate, you're finally split up legally with the state, in front of a judge for a divorce, Years down the line, after you have grandkids and everything else, and the whole system repeats itself over and over and over again, people give births to more people, and they file a birth certificate, and that slave goes through his whole life and does all this over and over and over again. Now you're a great-grandfather or whatever, and you're on your deathbed, and you die. Now you were filed a death certificate, or your family files a death certificate for you. Birth certificate, marriage certificate, house property deed, car title, divorce certificate, and death certificate. Are you seeing a pattern? And now you ask me why I am wanting to live in a camper van, being as far out from the system, not working the 9-to-5 slavery jobs that they got out to you, because that's exactly what the government wants you to do. They want you to work 100 hours a week, sleep 6 hours a day, if you're very, very lucky, because I think there's, 96 hours in a week, so not 100 hours a week, but probably work 80 or 90 hours a week. Sleep maybe 6 hours a day, every day for your entire life, as much as you can ably work until you're 65 years old. And go into debt up to the eyeballs, because the more debt you're into, personal debt, which doesn't even begin to count the government, it's only the more personal debt they can keep you in, the more they can make you a nice, worthy, workable slave steward over their property. It's the shits, but as soon as your eyes are open to it, half of the people who watch this video are going to be completely brainwashed slaves and go on full of a bunch of BS, that you've heard this videos before, that this is not the thing, and you people are pretty well brainwashed, and I hate to say it. There's nothing that's going to save your lives on that. There's a few of us van dwellers out there and some other people living in tiny houses and off the grid and so on that are beginning to realize that there is a way to live a little more free, a little bit less into the slavery world. But this is why I don't work my butt off anymore. I used to have 3 jobs. I saw a YouTube video earlier of another van dweller, gonna be a RVer, who's working a full-time job, a part-time job, and then an outside weekend job on top of that to pay his debt off, and I was in that position before. Don't get me wrong, I was right there working my ass off doing 96-hour work weeks. When I wasn't sleeping or eating, I was working. And that was when I was young and dumb and 20. Until I finally realized this. This is why other people ask me why I'm not a cop anymore. I worked for the 3 months, my eyes got opened up to the system. Don't get me wrong, I respect law enforcement. They have one hell of a hard job keeping track of all the criminals in society, because there are a bunch of bad nuts in our society. Probably 2 or 3% of the population is bad. The news makes it look way worse than it actually is, with bombings and people killing everybody, and they blow up that 1% like it's 99% bad and 1% good out in this world. That's why I went on a rideshare the other day. Because there are a few travelers out there who actually realize, they go out to the entire U.S. or the entire world, and they actually realize the world's not as bad as the news and the television try to make it look like it is. They want to keep you slaves in fear, so that you'll do good little orderly things, go to school, get your secondary higher degree, go to work, slave your ass off all your entire time off, and hopefully pay maybe a 0.11111% of the country's debt off per person, if you're very, very lucky, and keep us kind of iffy, if the government doesn't keep spending way more than the slaves can pay back. So, let that soak into your head. There's going to be other people here, and I apologize ahead of time if you don't want to work anymore now that you heard the video. I'm sorry, but somebody down the line showed me the door, opened my eyes to it, and I waited a long time to even begin to make a video on it. So, it's about to 13 minutes. I actually made this video in under 15 minutes flat, so I'm going to go back to the library, upload it, see what you think, leave comments and questions about it. I can available and free to answer any questions you have. And I'm sure there's going to be some brainwashed slaves out there who tell me to get a life and it's a bum excuse for not working and whatever, Don't get me wrong, I'm going to be working and doing work camping and living in my van or living in a cargo van and working and whatnot. Don't get me wrong, I haven't totally given up on society, but I'm not going to be in debt to society any more than I have to be on credit cards and whatnot because of this. I don't want to be as good of a slave. We're still all stuck in this system. It's just how much you participate in it. Like and subscribe, leave comments, we'll catch you on the flip. Peace. Anyway, and I'm sitting here watching these students go back and forth from the front of the dorm down that way, to the classes or the union up that way. And I just keep thinking about how, first of all, they're going into probably, your average student goes into $20,000 or $30,000 worth of college debt by the time they get out of college, unless they're lucky enough to get it paid for through like the tribal member or the scholarships, sports scholarships and the like. So right off the bat, they're willingly signing their lives over to be slaves pretty much to the economy, in the hopes that when they get off, graduated in a career of their choosing, that they like it, and that they start at the bottom, run with the ladder and work their way up, and slowly work their way up after 20 years, and then all the while requiring more and more debt, getting that, going from an apartment or the dorm to an apartment to a house to probably a bigger house as you dock on getting kids and whatnot, family started and whatever. The system looks pretty as a nice American dream of having, a wife and kids and, one boy and one girl and some dogs and some cats and a white picket fence, a big old house, and, driving 3 different cars. All of that sounds nice and pretty until you look at the, the bottom line, the behind of it, where they're all mostly, the house is in debt up to the eyeballs to pay the house off for 20 years. Then you're looking at your college debt you're still having to pay on. Then you're looking at the car payments, because most likely they don't drive around in, paid off cars. If they do, it's their teenage kids driving off into paid off cars that they've had forever, that they just now find they got paid off, because they don't want to go into a $20,000 debt loan and have to insure that with the kids or anybody that's under 25 years old for insurance.
And I just look at the way this system's set up. It's just meant to keep us enslaved all the way from about 18 years old, when your parents were taking care of you as, the main slave of the household, till from 18 all the way up to when you're taking care of your kids. I mean, it might be the life for some people, working 9 to 5 at a job you may or may not like anymore because you spent so much time in it, but you spent so much time before that, for 2 years or 4 years in college, or 6 years or 8 or however many, depending if you're getting a medical degree or what, on that field of study. So you figure you're stuck in it now. That's a life choice you made back in the day when you were 18 and you spent so much time and money on it. Now you're stuck in that job, and people wind up hating their jobs and hating their lives, and living for that 4 hours a day that they actually have of freedom. They spend 8 hours at their job, if they're lucky, only 8. Some people work 12 or 15-hour days, so they can come home, sleep for 8 hours in their nice big house with a bedroom that serves only one purpose. Of the bedroom is to sleep, and the rest of the time that bedroom's just, not even occupied. It's just space that you're taking up on this earth for nothing, really, in terms of, for 8 hours a day. Yeah, I would truly say knowledge is dangerous. This is Grant. You're all coming to you from the Stillwater Library in Stillwater, Oklahoma. November 5th, 2014. And from the other day, and I was eating that. This woman who pulled up here in this blue car gave me a funky look. And then she went in the library with her daughter. Not 5 minutes later, here come a librarian or somebody that's in charge of the library back out there, walking out here seeing if I had a place to live or where I was going or whatever the hell. Anyway, I proceed to tell the librarian, or ask the librarian, first of all, let me ask you this question. Your car's in the parking lot, right? And she's like, yeah. Was it like newer? She looked at me kind of weird, and I just said, well, I'm not going to do anything to it, I'm just saying. And she goes, yeah, are you making payments? And she's like, yeah, well then technically you don't own it. Well, what about your house? And I had her go into about her house, and that she's has 12 more years to pay it off or something. And I said, okay, now you look at me, I'm about maybe 20 grand in debt by about the end of a year worth maybe of living out of my car and working someplace, $1,000 a month or couple grand a month or whatever. I could have my debt paid off, whereas you're 20 grand in debt just on my car alone. And then you turn around and say you've got a $98,000 house that you're in debt on, that you have 12 more years to pay, so I'm guessing you're about $70,000, give or take, more to pay off on it. Just that alone. Do you have kids? And she's like, yeah. Well, there's college education costs right there. The further and further I dug in, the stupider and stupider I made her look. I mean, she came out here thinking I was the dumb one for sleeping in my car, but in that deal I walked off from it to come back over here and get my touchpad. And I left her sitting there, dumbfounded. I think I finally woke up that slave. But we're all slaves to this system, man. That's the way they want us. Having a mortgage on your house, having payments on your car, being $100,000 or more in debt up to your eyeballs that you'll never get paid off in your lifetime. You'll be lucky to get it paid off just in time to retire, and by then you'll probably die before you can enjoy it. I remember a few years ago, probably like 4 years ago or so, I saw this Facebook advertisement. Well, not advertisement, but it was a sign that basically said, this country's kind of messed up in the fact that when you come into a bank, the banks lock all the pens, chain all the pens to the counter, but then you look in the back and the bank vault with all the money in it is wide open. And all I gotta say to that is there's a reason for it. Number one, the pen is mightier than the sword in the way that, you can sign your life away with loans, mortgages, house payments, credit, for money that you don't even have yet, that you have to pay back later, and so on and so forth. And the banks love that, so they make dang sure their pens are right there at the counter for you to use. And number two, our money anymore these days is worthless. The fact that they leave the bank vault open is because it's pretty much useless compared to the credit. So I just thought I'd make a quick video about it. Like, subscribe, leave your thoughts on the subject, and we'll catch you on the flip. Peace.